So, hi everybody, good afternoon. Coming to you from Bio. I'm Seema Kumar, I'm the CEO of Cure, and it's a pleasure to have you all here with us for a conversation from Cure on the Road at Bio. And here with me today is Dave Greenwald. He is the VP for Business Development for Deerfield Management, and we are here to talk about all things biotech.
Thanks so much for having me.
As you know, today we actually released a new report, a benchmark report called Ready, Set, Growth. And it is about the results of a survey that we conducted, looking at the biotech landscape and looking at what the sentiments are and what areas are hot and what's not and what are enablers and disruptors. And there seems to be a high level of optimism in the industry. Seems like people are betting on high growth this year, coming out of the slump of the last couple of years for biotech. What are your thoughts about the sentiment that were, seen in the survey respondents?
First of all, I'm glad that Cure was able to do this survey. I think it's important to keep, our finger on the pulse of what's going on in the industry and how people are feeling about it. As we're here in San Diego, there's lots of activity at the conference, and I think that's partially reflected in the optimism that came out of the survey. So, from my perspective, certainly things have gotten better from 2022, 2023, post-COVID kind of, downturn, if you will, in the healthcare sector is starting to show signs of life. So that's really encouraging.
That's great. And we're all happy for it. And it seems like the respondents are betting on it. Almost 80%, that's 79% said, this is potential for high growth here. And then diving in deeper, we looked at, which therapeutic areas are hot, what technologies are really driving future growth, and what potential disruptors could be. In terms of therapeutic areas, it felt like neurology and metabolic diseases ranked high, over oncology. Like that was a surprise to me because I thought with all the, innovations and focus on clinical trials in oncology, that would have been number one. What do you think?
Yeah, that was an interesting observation as well. So I agree. I think it's interesting that neurology and neuroscience ranked higher than oncology. I think that speaks to a lot of the advances that we've seen in the oncology space. As you know, the ASCO conference is right now wrapping up, and there's a lot of really exciting clinical data coming out in the oncology space. I've heard it said that, the 2010s were the decade of oncology, and that the 2020s will be the decade of neuroscience. So I think that's actually reflected a bit in the results from the survey.
That's great, and that's heartening because we all know Alzheimer's disease is, a big tsunami, and many of us, as we age and as our population grows older, it's bound to happen.
Yep.
And it's been heartening to see some drugs recently, last year, approved for Alzheimer's. So that's probably where that excitement is coming from. And obviously, same thing for the GLP-1s.
Completely agree. It's been a long time coming for the Alzheimer's drugs. As you know, these are very long, expensive clinical trials that take many, many years, whereas the oncology trials are typically shorter. So I think we've had steady progress on oncology over the last couple of years, but only recently in the last 2 or 3 years have there been these landmark approvals in Alzheimer's and other neurodegenerative diseases. As far as metabolic disease, this was another area that's really come along, obviously with Wegovy and Ozempic, really beating out all expectations and being used very widely. So there's definitely a lot of interest in metabolic disease as well.
It's good to see all of that growth and, optimism for the future. And then if you look at technology areas, where there is excitement, gene and cell therapy, won big time in terms of survey respondents' excitement for it, beating out, AI, which has been all the buzz. Everybody's been all about AI, but it seems like cell and gene therapy edged out AI and machine learning. And CRISPR came in the middle.
Yep.
What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, that was very exciting to see. Cell and gene therapy is an area that's very near and dear to my heart. It's my scientific background, and so I was very excited to see that cell and gene therapy and gene editing ranks so highly on the survey. And I think it's due to a couple things. So I think that, again, there's great clinical data coming out. Several cell therapies are already approved for oncology, but there's also, companies that are doing cell therapy for Parkinson's disease which is showing not only to be safe, but have early signs of efficacy. And for a very large indication like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, those early signs of clinical data are really encouraging. On the gene therapy side, there's now been several additional approvals in the last couple of years. And I would say importantly, there's a lot of durability. And so there are over 7,000 monogenic rare diseases, and we now have, functional cures for close to a dozen of them. So that, I think the gene therapy space is really poised to continue to deliver on, delivering these types of treatments for patients.
That's good. And we'll come back to the economics of it and, how do we think about the paradigm shift for the future? We'll come back to that in a bit. But I wanted to ask you a little bit about, other areas like AI and other technologies, right? What do you think the future is for AI-driven growth for the industry?
In terms of AI-driven growth for biopharma and drug discovery in general, I do think that it will play a tremendous role. There's no doubt about it. I do think that there's a little bit of a risk that it might get overhyped though, and people might think that it's going to be the be-all, end-all cure for every problem that we have in drug development. And that's where I think we need to be very careful. Really, the large language models and the AI is only as good as the data that goes into it, both in terms of the robustness of the data, but also the data quality. So it really depends on how good the data is that goes into these models to then inform what comes out. And at the end of the day, it's science, right? And it's nature, and it's not something that can be, easily manufactured. And we should trust but verify is probably the best way to use or approach using AI and those types of tools for drug discovery and drug development.
I love that, trust but verify. Focusing on a couple of other technologies that were not really mentioned, but they are emerging. Tell us a little bit about radiopharma.
Yeah.
And, that seems to be an emerging area. And where do we stand with that? And how are we still in the early stages?
So the radiopharmaceutical development has really taken off tremendously in the last, I'd say, 2 to 4 years. Mm-hmm. And if you go back longer than that, probably 5 or 10 years, there used to only be 2 big pharmaceutical companies in that space, primarily Bayer and Novartis. Now we have companies like Lilly, BMS, AstraZeneca, all making multi-billion-dollar acquisitions for companies that have really promising data. So the data has led to more big pharma companies coming into the space, and I think this has really helped investment into radiopharma from investors kind of boost the field. In terms of where we are, again, there's been very good clinical data that's been reported, but there's also still some challenges. So 2 challenges that I see are around supply chain and off-target toxicity. And so from a supply chain perspective, this is something that we've known about for a while, that this is, these isotopes have sometimes very short half-life. They require highly specialized manufacturing, and the logistics are very challenging. Now, we've been able to overcome some of those challenges with today's technology and logistics, but in order to realize the full potential of radiopharmaceuticals, we're going to have to invest more into the infrastructure, more into the logistics, and explore other technologies to isolate these isotopes. In terms of the off-target effects, there's different technologies to block the radiopharmaceuticals from off-target tissues and cells, and I think that this will play out over the next couple years. Deerfield's been interested in the radiopharmaceutical space for quite some time, and we are also interested in a technology in the space called boron neutron capture therapy, BNCT. We recently held a BNCT summit at the Cure about 2 weeks ago.
Yes.
And we had over 175 people attend from 4 continents and all range of drug development and government and investors. So this is a really interesting technology, and it actually addresses 2 of those concerns around manufacturing and off-target. Because the way that BNCT works is there's a drug that delivers boron, and from a supply chain perspective, there is more than enough boron in the Earth's crust to treat all cancer patients for many hundreds of years. So this is not a supply chain limited situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then on the off-target toxicity, BNCT is activated by an external neutron beam. And so you're only activating the radiation in the cells that get the boron and get a neutron. So it's kind of a two-component system that limits the off-target toxicity and really focuses this alpha therapy onto the cancer cells.
Very exciting, and we'll be watching closely as this field matures and continues to grow. Last but not least, there was, more comments in the section on women's health than almost every other category of things that we questioned and queried respondents on. And two messages from that came up. One, everybody feels like, yes, investment in women's health is important. I mean, this is a long ignored area and we need to be doing more. The second sentiment was maybe more women in science would lead to more investment in women's health companies. And then finally, I think the key question was, how do we drive this forward? Could this be the green shoots that we're looking for to drive the growth in the biotech industry? So what are your thoughts about that?
First of all, I agree, and I'm glad this was included in the survey. Women's health is an incredibly important area, and there's no doubt that it is underinvested and under commercialized by the industry. I think that, quite frankly, it's about half the population, right? Yeah. So it's a really important,
and it's a big market.
It's half the population.
Yes.
So I would love it if more big pharmaceutical and biotech companies would really dig their heels in and get focused on women's health, because there's a lot of unmet need, and it's a big commercial opportunity as well. To your point around having more female entrepreneurs, more female board members, and whether or not that will spur more interest into women's health, I actually think that the two are a little bit separate. So I think it's a great idea to have more women entrepreneurs and female board members of private and public biotech companies. Some of the best bosses that I've worked for have been women. No offense to Jim Flynn, but it's true. I mean, they're great managers and super smart. But I think that in order for the women's health industry to really take off within biopharmaceuticals, we need to have more big pharma and biotech really engage into the space. And it's actually very similar to radiopharma 10 years ago.
Yep.
When there was only two big pharma companies, there was limited investment. And then when you realize how the technology can really have an impact on a very meaningful commercial market, other big pharma companies came in. That led to M&A and IPOs and further investment. And so I hope we see the same type of trend with women's health, but it will probably take some time. So I think it's great that it was captured in the survey the way it was.
Thank you. There's a lot of money going in from the government sector, at least. So hopefully big pharma will follow. And finally, we asked people about policy implications and challenges. So the big challenges that I think were cited, obviously, policy implications were up there, but it was less so the IRA and the Inflation Reduction Act. But it was much more so. There's two other things that came up. One, I think, is the area of manufacturing and the new payer model for things like cell therapy and gene therapy. How do we solve for that? Second, of course, was drug pricing. A subset of the Inflation Reduction Act. And then, we also asked about the Biosecure Act and, how is that going to affect, the future growth? What are your thoughts on how we solve some of these big hurdles?
I should say, these are obviously all my own personal thoughts. These are not, the views of Deerfield as an organization or anybody else. But, this is a very sensitive topic because I can see arguments both ways, right? And with regards to the IRA, this one, I really have a hard time with it because I'm not really sure what the justification was. And I think there was a pretty big outcry from investors and industry that it kind of, didn't really hit the objectives that they thought it was going to achieve. So the IRA thing, I think people have come to accept it at this point. With regards to gene therapy and how that's going to get paid for, it's a real issue. I mean, these are some of the most expensive drugs in the world. I think what it comes down to is durability. If it's the promise of a one-time cure for a patient, that's fantastic. It has to last multiple years. And you also have the challenge of people changing insurance over time. So if that entire gene therapy payment was done by today's, the healthcare insurance company that you have today, and then the average person changes jobs 13 times throughout their career, it's an imbalance. And so I think that it has to be judged, the durability over many years, and the payments probably have to reflect that as well. And that way you're kind of mitigating the risk across multiple payers. With regards to the Biosecure Act, I mean, again, personally, this is also something I'm a little bit challenged with. So it's, I think the result of it is going to make the whole drug development process more expensive and take longer than if it was more of a free market where you could manufacture and produce these drugs, from any country in the world, pretty much. So challenges. I certainly understand why the policymakers have chosen to, write law to kind of put us in this direction. But I think over the long term, these things will resolve themselves over time. But in the short term, I think the industry will adapt, as we always do, and will be resilient. And, we'll look forward to tomorrow.
As we said in the title of the report, ready, set, growth. Well, thank you all for joining us. And thank you, Dave Greenwald, for being with us and giving us your thoughts on biotech's future.